but this was a married couple, and they were well-dressed, what we would have called a yuppie back in those days. And I wondered what was going on and asked one of them, and they said, well, they want to have a baby. So they got pregnant, and then when they did an ultrasound, they found out it's twins. But they're not sure if twins would fit their lifestyle, so they're researching it.
Hi, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Philip McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Philip Scoop.
Yes, this scoop is brought to you by Bud Light.
Stop it, Philip. Okay. Yes, what's happening this week, Philip?
This week, what's on the show? Well, the LA Times acknowledges that the idea of recent climate change is ludicrous, but will keep pushing the nonsense anyway.
On Law and Disorder, LA Style, we bring you the latest casualty of DA Gascon's I Love Crime policy.
Yeah, we're not going to call it soft on crime anymore. We're going to call it I Love Crime. And I love criminals.
And we're going to bring you the other half of a story the media just do not want you to know about.
Yes.
The Atlantic magazine may believe he's a hero, but we talk to a nurse who worked for the notorious late-term abortion doctor Warren Hearn out of Boulder, Colorado. And we hear the truth about what happened to make her walk away from there. And
it's late-term abortion, as notorious late. He's not dead. These are late-term, and these are very late. And you mean, but it's a great article because when you read it with our knowledge, you see so much there. And then we're going to talk to someone who was inside the clinic working alongside him. You won't want to miss that interview. It's shocking. It's sad. It's interesting.
But before we get there...
Yes. Oh, yeah, so...
What happened on a beach in California, Philip?
Well, that sounds like the opening to a bad song or something like that. But, so, my attention was attracted to a beach jogger turns in artifact after a Santa Cruz expert puts out an alert to retrieve it. So, it's by Vanessa Arredondo in the LA Times. Jennifer 𝙤𝙤 was walking near the Rio del Mar State Beach near Santa Cruz during Memorial Day when she spotted something unusual on the sand. The foot-long object resembled a piece of driftwood, but 𝙤𝙤 wasn't certain, so she took a picture of it, posted on the Facebook, and asked if anyone could identify it. So anyway, the kind of long story short, it turns out it is the fossilized. What is it? It's a molar.
It's a tooth.
It's a molar tooth belonging to a Pacific mastodon,
an
elephant-like mammal that existed between 5,000 and 10,000 years ago. So we would have known Joe Biden then, right?
That's very good, Philip, actually. I have to say, as your jokes go, that's fairly high up there.
Oh, get a little dig there.
5,000 to 10,000 years ago, yes. A Pacific mastodon. This is what it looks like. Here's a photograph.
Well, Joe Biden had just been elected to the Senate.
Stop it.
So anyway, eventually it was found. It went missing. It was found. And then you've got the expert, right? Wayne Thompson, a paleontologist. See, he's a paleontologist, so he doesn't really know what he's saying. He knows, of course, about paleontology, which is the study, I believe, of fossils, etc.
Absolutely.
But he says, this is an extremely important find. Thompson wrote, give me a call when you get a chance. So then they found it. And then he says in the LA Times article, when the tooth was fossilized, sea levels were over 300 feet lower than they are today. 300 feet lower. 300 feet lower. Elephants and mammoths could walk out to the Channel Islands, right? So basically, the Channel Islands, that's Catalina. No, they're closer islands.
So is this film because of people driving SUVs then?
Then he says, it's another piece of evidence we have for climate change. And it's like 300 feet. So what you're really saying is 99.9999999% of sea level rise happened before I went on my cheap flight to Mexico, our body SUV. So basically, the sea levels have been rising because we are coming out of an ice age. Just ask Joe Biden, and okay, the joke's getting a bit thin now, but like Joe Biden's hair.
Stop it. Move on.
And his brain. So they just caught my attention, but the LA Times, there they have an admission that sea level rose long before
there were any SUVs. But will they mention that in their coverage? Will they put in any kind of that's interesting, maybe we should look again at this or think twice? No, just move on and kill cow. I mean, you saw that thing in Ireland, Anne. So Ireland, to meet its climate, according to an internal memo,
which they're now describing as a discussion document, Ireland is going to have to kill 200,000 cattle. Now, that's a lot of cattle for Ireland.
That's a lot of cattle, yeah.
200,000 cattle for Ireland to meet their climate change targets. Have they ever heard of the words food security? Have they, the idea that what are we going to do? Import all our beef from China, Brazil, India.
Maybe this is the the thing that will eventually wake people up. I'd like to think so, but equally, I think a similar thing is happening in the Netherlands, where they're saying basically you'll have one sausage a week. This madness. This madness is everywhere. But talking of madness, the LAPD arrested a man for stabbing the neck of a construction worker, nearly killing him. Despite a prison recommendation from probation department, LADA George Gascon's administration agreed to give him a diversion instead. He is now charged with murdering his neighbour last week. Yeah. So well done again there,
Yeah.
The main kind of story we wanted to get to today, which I think is extraordinary, is, because we our whole modus operandi here is unreported stories. And if ever there was an unreported story, this is one, I think. So you'll probably notice since Roe was overturned, there has been an enormous amount of ink spilled describing how there are these abortion bans, these dramatic abortion bans all over the country, and
people can't get abortion,
partial abortion bans, and a bit of an abortion ban, and some kind of abortion ban, abortion ban, and all very exciting, and all very dramatic, and all of that, and all
very
of that.
sad stories,
terrible, and all this kind of thing. So when you look at the map, though, of America, you find that that in terms of population, slightly less than half of the country is affected by these bans, slightly less than half. So what is going on in the rest of the country? So around half of the country have a different thing going on. And it's funny that we don't get much word about that. And I think the reason, and I'll explain this to you, Phelim,
well, what's the difference? What's going on?
So what is actually going on in the rest of the country?
Yes.
Basically, in most of the rest of the country, you can have an abortion up to 9 months.
Yeah, and this is an abortion expansion. This is new, right?
And this is new.
In most
places,
they have hugely increased, as they say, abortion access.
Yeah, it's funny,
right?
They love that kind of language. So they use this kind of euphemistic language. Protect.
Murder affirming.
Yeah, yeah. I like that one. Even the producer had to laugh there at that one. Yes. In fairness, yeah. What did you call that, Phelim? Murder affirming. Yeah.
Yes, murder affirming healthcare.
So why do you think we haven't heard so much about the other half of the country? Because the laws are so extreme that there is no real way for them to say what those laws are without saying what those laws are. And saying what those laws are is actually repulsive to almost everyone. So most Americans, the vast majority of Americans are somehow are in favour of abortion, but with super restricted, incredibly restricted. So this unrestricted abortion, which is increasing all over the country, is not being reported on, and people don't actually know what's happening. So what I've decided to do here is, and we're going to put up a map here, and hopefully this is going to work. We're going to show you, what this actually looks like, and we're going to go from state to state. Have a look at how this is happening. So if we start up here in Washington State, the gestational ban is at 24 weeks. Better to say what that really is. That's 6 months. That you can have an abortion in Washington up until 6 months. And what's important as well to do here that I want to kind of try and do, if I can open that document here, is to contrast that with Europe, progressive Europe.
Well, everyone. Washington's but let's really go.
Before we even do that, okay.
Talk about New York there.
Let's go to Oregon then. So Oregon. Okay. So there is no cutoff. So there's no ban of any kind. So Oregon has abortion up to 9 months. Then we go down to California. California, 24 weeks, 6 months. Then go to Arizona. So Arizona is different. 12 to 15 weeks. Right. By the way, 12 to 15 weeks, is more in line with Europe. So Colorado is also very interesting. We're going to come to Colorado in more detail in a moment, because Colorado has had these laws forever. They've just made them even more. I think they've put them into their constitution. But also look here at New Mexico.
No cutoff.
No cutoff
of
any kind.
You can have an abortion up to 9 months then.
In New Mexico, in Oregon, and also up here in Vermont. No cutoff in Vermont.
The reality is, what we're saying is, it's never reported that there's been this massive expansion of murder affirming healthcare, right? Everyone says that, people have been stopped killing babies all in Texas and Florida, whatever. But the expansion of this is an unreported story.
Yeah.
And this article in the Atlantic
about Warren Hearn, who I've heard about before because I happened to meet somebody who worked for Warren Hearn, and we're going to talk to her in a few minutes.
Yes.
But before we come to that, I mean, we read this article. I mean, kind of extraordinary. Just before I go forward, just to say again, to contrast these incredible abortion limits that there are in most of America,
yes,
is up to 6 months. Most of America, or up to 9 months. Just to contrast that, so it's either 6 months or 9 months in most of America. France, the limit is 3.5 months. In Germany, the limit is 3 months, requires counselling at a state-approved centre and a 3-day waiting period. That's the Germans, by the way. You know,
yep.
And equally, like Finland, the limit is 3 months. You know, and to contrast that with Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C., no limit, up to 9 months. So coming to Colorado, yes, the Atlantic magazine has recently published a long essay celebrating the life of Walter Hearn. Who
wrote it? And who wrote
that? Elaine Godfrey. Elaine Godfrey.
Not much God, Elaine Godfrey.
So this man, Warren Hearn, is 85 years old now and working as much as...
Can I just say something?
Yes.
So, you know, there's lots of interesting paragraphs in this, but a thing that really struck us was the incredible similarities to Kermit Gosnell.
Yes.
Like, we know Kermit Gosnell probably better than anyone else on this planet. We've covered his trial. We have seen all the statements he has made, all the statements his co-workers have made. We've seen they've give evidence over a 6-week period. We've spoken to Kermit Gosnell. Would you say 100 hours at this stage, Anne?
A long time.
We've met him. We've interviewed him in prison. We've had letters with him. We really know this man well, and we know a lot of his workers really well. And the similarities between Warren Hearn and Kermit Gosnell are chilling. That, I mean, even his patients and staff, and even the journalists calling him brusque and gruff. Yeah. That was exactly Kermit Gosnell with his patients. He treated them like crap.
But interesting, and in a few interesting details, both Kermit Gosnell and Warren Hearn from Boulder, Colorado, are both poets.
Yes,
so he writes poetry, and also Warren Hearn takes photography. You know, he does wildlife photography, and of course he's an avid environmentalist, by the way, which I also thought was interesting. And there's a lot of details. We're going to talk in a few minutes now to someone who worked for him. But just before we get there, I mean, incredible things about him. He was very involved in sterilizations, by the way. You know, sterilizations, of course, very connected to the eugenics movement. Mm-hmm. You know, this is the kind of background this guy has, and there's a few interesting details that the article mentions, and we're going to go into them in detail. But one of them is, you know, while the journalist is sitting there in the reception area, she hears somebody making an appointment to have one of these late-term abortions, and the price is $6,000, and then later in the article we'll find out that they do about 12 of them a week. Now that's what they say, by the way. Yes. So we don't have any way of independently verifying it. I mean, but let's just base it on their own numbers. So if it's 12 a week, it's basically about $3.5 million a year.
And that's the late term ones.
And that's all he does, right? So that's what he does. He specialises in that. So basically, this is what the business is. By the way, other details I love. He doesn't like being called an abortion doctor, and it's like, that's weird, because he works in a place called the Boulder Abortion Clinic,
yes,
which he called the Boulder Abortion Clinic because he didn't want people to have any difficulty finding him. Mm-hmm. There's this article is just packed full of stuff. I think what we should do now.
I quite like Frances Kissling, founding president of the National Abortion Federation.
Yes, Catholic.
She has misgivings about his work. She's now joined Catholic, so she now leads Catholic.
She's a big Catholic,
but she has misgivings about his work. Later-term abortions are more serious ethically than earlier abortions, she said. My ethics are such that I would say to them, I'm terribly sorry, I cannot perform an abortion for you. I will do anything I can to help you through the next 2 or 3 months, but I can't do this. My question is, like, what's the difference between, like, does it become suddenly unethical at 3 months and 1 day, or what's your cutoff date? 4 months and 1 day, 5 months and 1 day, midnight on the 4th month.
Well, we've nothing good to say about the National Abortion Federation, because our memory of them was that they inspected Gosnell's clinic, thought it was the worst place they'd ever walked into, and then just walked away and didn't report him. But this Miss Frances Kissling is an extraordinary character, because she's gone on from being the founding president of the National Abortion Federation to becoming the now she's
fake Take Catholics for Choice.
Lead an organisation called Catholics for Choice. Yeah. So actually, yes, you're right. Let's call things as they are. Fake Catholics for Choice.
Yes.
Because this is incompatible. Catholics and it's completely incompatible.
So I mean, other things. He's a big sterilizer. He loves sterilising people. He, and even the journalist is forced to mention, that might be that brings up interesting ideas about eugenics. Yeah, he started off as a big sterilizer.
Yeah, in 1970, here's that paragraph, by the way. In 1970, Hearn accepted a job at the now defunct Office of Economic Opportunity in Washington, D.C., where he led the effort to open family planning clinics across the country and launched a voluntary sterilisation program for adults in Appalachia.
Yeah.
Given the link between eugenics movement and the early birth control movement, the word sterilisation can carry an ominous ring. Oh, really? Yeah, right. Hearn says, though, that his work was intended to give low-income people choices and reduce their financial hardships. Families like these, he wrote in the New Republic at the time, require housing, clean water, food and sanitation. But one of the most important needs is freedom from the tyranny of their own biology.
Well, I like. What was the name of the Office of Economic Opportunity? The Office for Economic Opportunity decided that the way to give people economic opportunity was to make sure they have no children in these places. Like, how anti-human, how anti-family. And as he says, he believes humans are a cancer.
Yeah, I'll get on to that part. I mean, another thing that I really like about this Atlantic article, by the way, is so Hearn started in Colorado in 1973. He started, so I'm just going to read that bit. In 1973, Hearn was back in Colorado, the first state to decriminalise abortion in some circumstances, whatever, right? So, he got a call from a Colorado group that wanted to start a not-for-profit abortion clinic in Boulder. I thought this was an interesting detail, Philip. I don't know if when you read it, if this jumped out at you, by the way. So would Hearn be their medical director? Of course he said he would. Absolutely. So the Boulder Valley Clinic opened in November of that same year. So that's November 1970. What did I say? 1973. So then what's interesting is 1975, almost less than 2 years later, Hearn decided to open a for-profit abortion clinic.
Yes.
So he just obviously was in this not-for-profit and thought, hang on a little bit. This, you know what I mean? And there's no real great reason, by the way, given why he stopped working for the not-for-profit. And the reason they give, but by the way, he gets cover from the writer of this article, because basically that the reason is because he wanted to call it the Boulder Abortion Clinic, avoiding euphemisms about women's care because he wanted patients to be able to find them, which is kind of interesting because then he says he doesn't like to be called an abortion doctor.
So, I mean, look, we should actually, you know what, we should go now to Julie, because we can talk about this article forever, but let's go to the person who worked with him.
And knows him
personally and professionally. So let's go over to that interview now.
Okay.
So we're very pleased to be joined by Julie Wilkinson, who used to work for Warren Hearn in the Boulder Abortion Clinic. And you first met Julie at some event?
Yes, I was in Oklahoma. We were shooting the Gosnell movie, and Pastor Paul Blair invited me to speak at his church. What a wonderful person who I have not been in touch with lately, so I'm hoping he's well. I know he had some illness, and what a beautiful person. And I spoke at that church, and afterwards a number of people came up to speak to me, but one person stood out in my memory, and that was you, Julie, and it's very, very nice to see you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So bring us back and tell us, when did you work for Warren Hearn?
I worked for Warren Hearn in the early 80s. I was a young nurse, and I wanted to leave a bad relationship behind me in Florida and took off for Colorado because a nursing school friend lived there. And she lived in Boulder. And there were no positions at that time in the local hospital, but I found an ad for a, quote, family planning clinic in Boulder, which was Warren Hearn's clinic.
And what was that? And talk us through the first time that you met him. What was he like? What was your first impression of that clinic?
Well, when I first went there, unfortunately, the family I was raised in, it was a relatively happy childhood, but both parents were quite liberal and very open-minded about Planned Parenthood, abortion, and things of that nature. So when I got to the clinic to interview, it became immediately obvious what the actual mission there was, because in large letters on the clinic, it says Boulder Abortion Clinic, which is unusual. Most clinics use some kind of euphemism. But I got in and had to interview, and he was quite wary. He always was wary of people that he didn't know well. And I told him my parents donated to 𝙭𝙗 and to Planned Parenthood, and that seemed to make him feel better. And unfortunately, I did not have strong feelings one way or the other. So I thought, well, this would be a day shift job. This wouldn't be too bad. And he wasn't exactly a warm and fuzzy person, but many doctors aren't. So I accepted the position when I was offered it.
And it's interesting, actually, in the Atlantic article, because, you know, exactly what you're saying, he's described as quite gruff. I mean, even the journalist, who I think has interviewed him more than once,
brusque.
that he's brusque and that he's gruff and that he has this nature. What, like back then in the 80s, you know, what kind of clientele were coming there? Was it busy? Was it all very late term? Go on.
It was mostly young college women, because of course Boulder is University of Colorado. But there were also quite a number of people that would come in from out of state, because in the mid 80s there wasn't as much availability for late term abortion. Well, there are only a few today that will do them very late, but he was one of them. So occasionally we'd get people from out of state that oftentimes a young girl who hadn't told her mother she was pregnant until she was quite far along. And they would come there because at that time in Colorado, the limit was 24 weeks for a late abortion. Unfortunately, it is now to term.
And, I mean, from reading the Atlantic article, Hearn really enjoys, or he seems to really enjoy what he's doing. He's 85 now. He has no intention of retiring. He loves what he's doing. He sees it as a kind of vocation. Was that something that you felt there, that he was enjoying it, or, you know, he got pleasure?
Well, my feelings then as well as now were that abortion is a mission for him. Warren Hearn never really hid the fact about his zeal for environmentalism, and he always seemed passionate about the effect people are having on Earth. And I'm sure you're aware of the book that came out recently. The Latin name for it is 𝙁𝙘𝙊𝙆, which basically means man eating or destroying the Earth. That doesn't surprise me, because that was the type of person he was then, and I'm sure it's the type of person he is now. The less humans, the better. The less humans, the better.
Exactly. That's basically his philosophy.
One of the things that the pro-abortion movement do is that they make this point that, you know, first of all, that that it's incredibly rare. Late abortions are really, really rare. My research would suggest that it's at least 10,000 a year, and that's very conservative because there's no requirement to report. But the other point that they make, and this is the one that I want you to address, is that it's where the woman is like something really awful, some kind of medical drama, huge medical drama, or the baby is some huge medical drama. And in this article, in the Atlantic article, they acknowledge that at least half of the patients that saw Hearn, the baby was perfectly healthy. It
was elective.
It was completely elective, and the mother, there's nothing wrong with her either.
It was her choice, as they say.
As they say, according to the Atlantic article. What was your experience?
Well, my experience, and I would suspect, I'm a registered nurse, and I worked in other areas of obstetrics after I left that clinic, but it was extremely rare for it to be, first of all, I never saw an instance that was for quote unquote health of the mother. And second of all, I don't even recall an instance where there had been something diagnosed where the baby was going to have some sort of fatal illness after birth or whatever. It was strictly, quite frankly, it was a convenient sort of a thing. And the reality is, as we know, especially today, because I went on to work in NICU when I left that clinic, which is one of God's way of showing his sense of humor. And I loved working there. At that time, 27 weeks was about the limit of how early we could save babies. Now it's much younger. And the idea that it is safer and healthier to perform an abortion, a late-term abortion, versus delivering is utterly insane. And yet that's the excuse given.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because, you know, the journalist questions him. She asks him, and I think she wants an answer. Now, you can't, just like Gosnell, with so many similarities between Hearn and Gosnell. They write poetry, they're driven, they won't retire. They like, Gosnell like running, you know, they like outdoor activities. But she says, so if a pregnant woman with no health issues comes into the clinic, say at 30 weeks, what would you do? I asked. The question irked him. He says, quote, every pregnancy is a health issue. There's a certifiable risk of death from being pregnant, period. Right? So he, you know, this thing that half the late-term abortions are for medical reasons. You cannot believe a word this man says. And as your experience, Julie, is that that's not true.
It's, you know, we have the most sophisticated healthcare in the world, and high-risk pregnancies can be managed so much better than they could even in the 80s. So using that as an excuse, he's saying that to make people who are a little wobbly on it feel better. He himself, I don't believe, could care less what the real reasons are, because less people is better.
Julie, I have such a very clear recollection of our very first meeting and all our subsequent meetings, but I do remember from the first time that we met, you told me a story that you said shook everyone in the clinic when you were working there, about a couple who came who were pregnant with twins, and
no medical issues.
And they had, first of all, they were in a they were happily married. They had no money problems, and the babies were perfectly. I'm going to let you tell the rest of that story, because it had a big effect on me. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, we became accustomed. As I said, most of our cases were young women. You know, a pregnancy that was unexpected. You know, the usual reasons you expect. But one time there was a little bit of whispering, because the patients initially would see some sort of a counseling staff. And I didn't necessarily meet them till later. But I remember there was some whispering about this couple, because first of all, they were a couple, which quite often the guy wasn't with the woman. But this was a married couple, and they were well-dressed, what we would have called a yuppie back in those days. And I wondered what was going on and asked one of them, and they said, well, they want to have a baby. So they got pregnant, and then when they did an ultrasound, they found out it's twins. But they're not sure if twins would fit their lifestyle, so they're researching it. So they were visiting friends who had twins to see what's life like with 2 high chairs instead of 1. And then they came to the clinic so that if they went that way, that route, they'd know what that was going to entail. And truthfully, I believe all of us there were hoping, whispering amongst ourselves, surely they won't be back, because these were people that clearly had money, clearly had a stable marriage. But very sadly, they did end up on the schedule a couple weeks later to abort healthy 17-week-old twins.
Yeah, I just always remember that. And you actually made the point when you told me that story a few years ago. You said that it actually did shake up the staff. And it's interesting that was the one that, and it's kind of, there's something weird about that too, you know, because it's like, why that as opposed to... But
it's funny, David, we spoke to David 𝙤𝙤, who did the Planned Parenthood body parts.
Julie would know David well.
Yeah, I'm just saying for people out there, you know, David 𝙤𝙤 body parts investigation undercover, and he's spoken to a number of staff, and he says the thing that tips a lot of them over the edge is twins. It's very interesting. It's something visceral that just gets people.
It's stunning, because let's face it, when we're doing things that our soul knows is wrong, we try to find ways to justify. Well, she doesn't have a boyfriend, or she's got an abusive one. She has no money, and you try to justify it. But when you have something like that case, it's very difficult to deal with that. And of course, it was an involved procedure. It's not without risk doing these late-term procedures, but she was literally willing to do that versus having to face whatever she imagined having twins would be like.
Extraordinary, Sad. And your own journey there, I mean, tell us what happened to you, and how your heart changed, or what happened.
Where are you now?
Well, as I said, when I first started to work there, I actually didn't have strong feelings, because my dad was a physician, and very liberal, donated to Planned Parenthood, 𝙎𝙬𝙬. He thought that was a good thing. So I was raised thinking that that was probably something worthy that should be legal and safe. And so that's why I didn't have strong feelings, even though I felt I was a Christian believer. But as time went on, and I met my future husband, and I just really didn't want to be in that environment anymore. So I left there on good terms. But truthfully, I had buried my own feelings about it, which nurses can be very good at. If you've worked in intensive care or trauma, places I had worked before the clinic, you really get good at burying your feelings. And it took a while for me to really let myself start thinking about what had happened there. I won't say I had nightmares at night, because I think that's part of the guardian wall that nurses put up for themselves, but it did bother me. And as my faith walk increased, I was disturbed that I'd ever taken a check for that. And I would occasionally listen to the FM dial had James Dobson, Focus on the Family, and he would occasionally talk about pro-life issues. And I found my heart really turning that way. But I was so ashamed of where I'd been that I didn't share it. No one knew that I'd worked there except one or two of my closest friends and my fiance. But I was very ashamed of it, and it was just a dark secret for many years.
What convinced you to come forward? What convinced you to sort of,
speak up?
It was a lonely journey. There were groups that reached out to women who'd had abortions, Surrendering the Secret. There's many groups now to help people deal with how badly they feel after they've ended the life of a baby. But there was nothing for former workers. And early on in the internet days, there were bulletin boards. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. There wasn't Facebook or anything, but there was something like bulletin boards where you could just get on and kind of chat with people. And I would check this one periodically just to see if anybody ever talked about former abortion workers. Nobody did. But I made a comment once because you could still be anonymous, or at least I thought I could be. And somebody, and it was a guy, and I wish I knew who it was so I could thank him, but he said, "You really need to talk to Abby Johnson." And I didn't know who that was, but he gave me a contact number. I called her and ended up talking for quite a long time, and ended up being in her first retreat group for former clinic workers. And that was the first time I felt like I could talk to anybody about it. By then, my husband and I had 3 daughters, and I really didn't want them to grow up thinking that that was ever an acceptable thing to do. So I didn't tell them until each of them were older teens, and I felt like they could process it.
We're going to wrap it up. There's just so many questions to ask. When the journalist describes him as gruff and brusque, is that a code word for being obnoxious and rude?
Well, he was definitely a very bristly person. He was not a warm person. He was not somebody who we sometimes did things together as workers, but it was never, let's have Dr. Hearn with us. He really was not interested in personal relationships. He was already on his 3rd marriage when I was working there in the 80s. And I know he was married at least once again after that, because there's a movie about him and the other late-term doctors called After Tiller. Very interesting documentary. And when I watched it, I noted that he was on at least his 4th marriage at that point. But
yeah, he's married. His wife has talked about in the piece, and she used to run an abortion clinic in Barcelona, and actually she wants him. She wants him. She's Cuban, and she wants him to retire, but he's just refusing because he enjoys what he does. And the journalist even has some other doctors quoted saying, "Look, we know him. He's 85. He's too old. As she says, he shows his age sometimes. He's too old to be doing this complex surgical work. But you know, it probably keeps him alive. You know, death.
Well, I think he probably, and I think he probably, a bit like Gosnell, I think he likes the money. I think one of the interesting details that I thought was in the piece was that it's $6,000, and I was making a rough calculation that, you know, they're bringing in, north of $3.5 million a year in this quite small clinic in Colorado, you know, and I think he has an interest in that because he initially, as we were explaining earlier, initially he worked for a not-for-profit abortion place for like just less than 2 years before he decided, you know what, there's a lot of money in this. I think I should open my own clinic, which is what he ended up doing. Just extraordinary. But as you say, you left on good. So you never. And did you ever meet him again? Did you ever have any contact with him after?
No, I've never seen him again. I only have seen him in the media, and well, like I said, that documentary, which is excellent for anybody to get some insight into the kind of thinking, because it's one thing to do very early cases, but these people that do very late ones, there's absolutely no way to pretend you don't know what's going on there. You're seeing babies that would easily be saved in an intensive care nursery right now. Sometimes. Yes.
The thing about After Tiller does is
it's a great documentary.
But it pretends that every case is because of illness. Yeah, almost every. Yeah, it pretends every case. And there's one woman phones up. She's from France or somewhere like that. And oh no, we wouldn't do that because you're too far. And it definitely makes you believe that every case is because of illness or disablement, But then it slips out accidentally.
I think there's a little bit of that, but then they actually then show a case where there's a woman and it's like she wants to go on holidays and this isn't going to suit her, and it's all about I'm going to be coming back from Africa, and she's obviously very wealthy, and it's like it's just convenience. And I think this is one of the things that, as I said, I've got into these Twitter wars, and I know you're on Twitter as well, but I've got a few times I've got into these spats with pro-abortion people who want to deny the existence of late-term abortion in America. Yeah. And one of the points that we're making, because we sort of specialise in these unreported stories, is that since Roe was overturned, in fact, the laws have become more liberal in lots of places. So New Mexico, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, New Jersey have abortion up to 9 months for any reason. And the truth is people are using those services. And as I said, according to the Gus Institute, it's about 10,000 of these late-term abortions a year. But we have no idea how many because they're not required to report. For example, did Hearn keep, was he sending in, do you know if he was keeping note of the numbers? Was those numbers being reported?
Well, that I wouldn't know if he was reporting anything. He was, interestingly, he was, I've said it's a mission for him, and it is. He did record a lot of things because he wrote many books on abortion. I'm sure you guys know that. He had stacks of them in the break room and told us to take a copy of each one if we wanted. I ended up pitching them when I was having my conversion, but I wish I had hung on to them now, because it was like literally the Bible of how to do abortions.
Wow.
Yeah, he kind of boasted about abortions. I remember, he didn't he say that he talked about how we have to admit that late-term abortions involve suffering and pain for the baby, and it was like he was boasting, and people were saying to him, "Oh, take that down,
don't say that.
Don't say that." And he was going, "No, I have to be honest." And really, what he was doing, he was boasting. He was enjoying
the destruction of
the
life.
destruction. Yeah, he talked about it. It involves a necessary destruction, And they said, "Don't use the word destruction." He's going, "No, I'm happy about it." So yeah. He, as you say, it was a mission. Well, Julie...
Just last question. Did you keep in touch with any of the workers there, and do you know if any of them took the same path as you?
I did not. And I had briefly one of them. Some people were going on to something else, but I've lost track. And I keep hoping, because I continue to go to retreats with Abby Johnson, and I keep hoping one day I'll recognize someone. It would be my fondest wish to see someone else escape from that and find the joy of being on the right side, the pro-life side. That's the mission for the rest of my life, is to help encourage people to not take that route. There are alternatives. I tell you, people, when they choose, especially a late term, it was $22,000 or $23,000 when I worked there in the mid-'80s. It's much, much more than that now.
Well, funny.
So somebody has to come up.
Go ahead.
Go on, Julie.
Pardon me?
Go on ahead, Julie.
I was just saying, someone has to come up with a huge amount of money, and let me tell you, he doesn't give them away. They have to come up with the money. You know, and it's not done. Granted, he's right across the street from a hospital, but those are serious procedures.
Well, the journalist says in the article there's $6,000 a procedure, and if there were 23,000 in the 80s.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. That's a very interesting detail.
But of course, you know, the journalist, of course, is not checking these details. He says he does 12 a week, and he actually says, I've only ever done 2 sex selection abortions and all this. And like, you can't believe a word any of these abortion doctors says. And, you know, 6,000 struck me as low for our company. I mean, it's a lengthy process. We know this. I mean, it wouldn't pay for the nurse, for the anesthesiologist. I mean, it's a major process. So yeah,
unless he's doing things radically different, he didn't do, except for local anesthesia, which means right at the site where you're putting in instruments. There was no other anesthesia. That was part of my job, was coaching somebody to stay still while these things were going on.
Oh my God! Yeah, I was going to ask you what did you do when you were there? What was he asking you to do?
Well, I was his assistant. I opened the sterile packs. I handed the instruments. I tried to soothe the person when they'd start wiggling. His philosophy at that time could be different. He did not want the complications of any sort of sedatives, anything that would help somebody endure the discomfort more. So I was, you know, literally think about this. I had a person lying on the table who'd had no pain meds and had somebody poking in her body, sometimes for quite a while, because sometimes some parts were hard to get out. And I'll let your imagination be your guide.
Unbelievable.
So that's he enjoyed inflicting pain on people. He enjoyed destruction, as he said, and you know he boasted.
Well, he enjoys. I don't know, and you know, to be fair to him, I don't know if it's the sort of thing like some enraged killer that likes to see someone suffer. But what I think, in my opinion, what Warren Hearn enjoys is that's one less person that's going to terrorize and hurt Mother Earth. That's really crucial to him. And as you know, the book he wrote, you know, Latin, 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, people eating the earth. I thought that was so interesting. He's still obsessed with that.
You know, he needs to go and live in a cave. What's he doing living in his house in Boulder, Colorado?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He has a nice house up in the mountains.
I'm sure
Not that I ever saw it, because he never, ever invited staff there. But he lived in Black Hawk, which is a very expensive community outside of Denver. And, you know, so that all costs money. But, yeah. Yeah, he wants to go on as long as he can, because every person that isn't alive, I guess, is better for the earth. Only thing I can think of. It's very... Another reason for us not to like environmentalists, by the way. You know? If
he believes that, why didn't he start after you, Dr. Hearn, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's what I've always thought. Present company accepted, you know. Apparently it's still okay, because he has to be having some health issues at this point in time, which is costing money and costing Mother Earth and all that sort of thing. But that's all right.
And then you know that he does, and of course there's other detail that he does this photography, and he just loves, you know, like little birds, and you know, and he's very, you know, he just loves nature. It's just people he hates, basically. Yeah. And that's actually... He does hate people. He hates people, right?
The wife he had at the time was actually she was a nurse practitioner, although she didn't participate much in the procedures, but I got to know her a little bit, and she found out that I had pets and kitties and things, and that I liked them, and that she wished she could have one. And I said, why don't you have one? And she said, well, Warren won't allow it because some cat hair might get on the photography equipment, so we can't have a pet in the house. And I thought, wow, and you're going to put up with that? I don't know how long she lasted after that, because obviously they got divorced.
Yeah. What are you going to choose? You know, the cat or the photographic equipment? Well, well, we know where you know where we stand on that, Julie.
Another interesting thing he did, I want to throw out there, was every summer, the clinic, we knew it would be closed for 2 or 3 weeks, because he went to Peru, I believe, which is one of his hangouts, and, quote, to work at a health clinic. And I've always wondered what was really going on there. If he was, what was he really doing for those 2 weeks? You know, we can speculate if he was offering some sort of sterilization. This is all my speculation. Or maybe even ending some pregnancies, you know. I mean, who knows? Because these were relatively primitive people who would not have understood much about first world medical care. But I've always wondered. But that was someplace he faithfully would go down and do that. And I don't think it was to give babies vaccines.
Gosnell, well, a lot of Gosnell's early people, the people he worked with, the guy from the Mother's Day Massacre, he went to India and sterilized women and did experimental abortion techniques. So they love going to the third world and, basically experimenting on women. And
there's less regulation.
And then Gosnell found Pennsylvania, which is virtually unregulated, especially if you're black. No one cared. So he had free reign to do what he wanted. So funny how they always end up in these unregulated, impoverished places.
And he says he was, by the way, and Hearn says he was a friend of Tiller's, by the way, and and that he says, according to the piece, that he actually carried the coffin of Tiller, who was shot dead in a church, who was also the late-term abortion guy from Kansas. But yeah, and that they'd all met at the National Abortion Federation conference, which is where Gosnell had met Tiller as well. They're all loving it up back in Vegas. Yeah, I think they had those Abortion Federation conferences in Vegas. Can you imagine it? I mean, just a bizarre kind of contradiction, or just a bizarre kind of picture. Yeah.
Well, you were actually one of the first that I was brave enough to say something to. I was finally deciding it was time to get brave and start saying something. It was a little bit scary because I was afraid people wouldn't like me anymore if they found out I did such a terrible thing. But I'm very grateful for you guys' work.
All right, Julie, thank you so much.
Julie, thank you.
Thank you.
So that was an amazing interview. Thank God you met Julie in that church when you were speaking about Gosnell, and she came up to you afterwards. It's an amazing, amazing interview. The similarities between Hearn and Gosnell are just gobsmacking.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
Poetry,
right.
travel, abuse, brusqueness, gruffness.
Yeah.
It's just,
Funny, I don't remember. Funny, one thing I don't remember Gosnell talking about environmentalism, but I bet if you asked him, I bet he'd have the exact same.
Remember his poetry, pruning.
Oh yeah, the pruning is a good thing. But yeah, so basically Warren Hearn has actually written a book, an environmental book describing humans as a cancer on the planet, basically. So that, you see, that would give a great justification to what he does, because obviously we're ruining, humans are ruining everything, and that's a very strong theme in environmentalism, that this thing of there's too many people, and it's complete nonsense. In fact, if anything, it's exactly the opposite is the situation. We don't have enough people. We have a massive population problem in China, where the one-child policy has been a disaster. But the same is happening. I mean, I think India is okay. I think India is like the one place.
Africa is okay. That great engine of economic innovation, Africa.
But Europe is a disaster, and America is not doing well in terms of replacement.
South America is a disaster. Basically, all the world. So basically, the world population is going to plummet in about 20 to 30 years. And I mean, plummeting population. So you might think, so what? The problem is there's going to be 4 grandparents and 1 child looking after, or 8 grandparents and one 20-year-old earning money to pay for the care.
That's right.
For those children, and taxation. There's going to be individual young people will be responsible for an enormous number of dependents. Yes.
So each young person coming up is suddenly going to have this massive burden because of the fact that the population is not just stagnating, is actually declining.
How is the government going to tax?
But meanwhile, you have environmentalists peddling this nonsense, this population nonsense, and peddling that and brainwashing children in schools with this stuff. So not good. But we're not going to stop. And as I said, this is a very unreported story that since the Dobbs decision, since Roe was overturned, there have been 6 ballot initiatives. And I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying this because I think it's incredibly important that we know this. 6 ballot initiatives so far. The pro-life movement have lost all 6 of them. In 3 of them, the laws were changed to make abortion available up until 9 months. Really dramatic and really, unheard of, by the way, in the planet. The only places, the 7 countries that have such laws, including North Korea, China, Pakistan, I think is another one. Canada, of course, is obviously right in there. Canada has extraordinary laws, both in terms of abortion but also euthanasia, which they're liberalising all the time. So, Yeah, and what effect will that have on Canada? And by the way, Canada could really do with population. This is an enormous country that is incredibly sparsely populated.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's enough from us for today. We look forward to talking to you next week, and take care. Bye.